Welcome, Spiritual Mag. My name's Sam Bell, and we are going to tickle the fringe of what the truth is that you were hidden from. So, this is something which you may not have learned, and it was concealed from you. So take a deep breath. Here we go. Title: Jesus the Husband, Mary the Apostle, by Sam Bell. Rehabilitating suppressed histories to heal consciousness in 2025. Rehabilitating the narrative. In clinical neurolinguistics, we often witness the profound trauma that occurs when a patient's story is disordered, whether due to aphasia, traumatic brain injury, or degenerative disease. The rehabilitation process involves restoring coherence and dignity to fractured narratives. Similarly, the suppressed history of Jesus of Nazareth, Yeshua ben Yosef, and Mary Magdalene, Miryam of Magdala, demands rehabilitation, not to rescue them, but to reorient our collective semantic frame around divinity, around embodiment, around gender and power. Reclaiming suppressed histories is not just a scholarly pursuit, but an empowering and motivating endeavor that can heal spiritual trauma and reshape our understanding of spirituality. This narrative has the potential to transform our spiritual landscape, offering new perspectives and possibilities. The dominant ecclesiastical narrative, curated by Roman imperialism and perpetuated through centuries of epistemic control, presents Jesus as celibate, ethereal, divorced from carnal and familial ties. This version omits or downplays the richly embodied and relational aspects of his ministry, his spiritual partner, and his human lineage. However, alternative historical and cross-cultural evidence suggests that Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene, had children, and that his family line continued, possibly relocating to protect themselves from Rome's wrath. Even as Jesus himself survived the crucifixion and resumed his ministry, reaching India as a revered spiritual teacher. The significance of Mary Magdalene's role in this narrative is not just a historical fact, but a revelation that will intrigue and enlighten our understanding of these figures as we delve into the neurosemantic and historical implications of this narrative. It's crucial to remember that the time for this exploration is now. Explore the impact of Mary as the apostle to the apostles, Jesus' human marriage and paternity, and his continued earthly journey. In doing so, we illuminate how 2025's rising global consciousness is not merely ready for this knowledge, but starved for it. The urgency of exploring these narratives is not just a scholarly pursuit, but a crucial and relevant task in the context of our evolving global consciousness. As speech and language pathologists, we respect the nuances of semantic drift and lexical repression. The early church, under the dual pressures of Greco-Roman patriarchy and political expediency, systematically erased or minimized Mary Magdalene's role. By conflating her with a prostitute in Luke's gospel, absent from any textual foundation, the church institutionally pathologized female agency, purity, and theological authority. Yet Mary Magdalene's presence in the canonical and Gnostic text is far more profound than many are taught. In the Gospel of Mary, preserved in the fragments of the Coptic and Greek, she emerges as the trusted confidant of the risen Jesus, the one who receives his esoteric teaching and comforts the disoriented male disciples. Peter, in particular, contests her authority, an early example of apostolic misogyny. Yet, Levi defends her. This contest over her credibility and Jesus' post-resurrection instructions reflect early schisms between the Gnostic and the structural Roman wings of Christianity. Moreover, the Gospel of Philip, the Valentinian text from the Nag Hammadi library, refers to Mary as Jesus' koninos, a Greek term richer than companion, connoting spouse, consort, and intimate partner. It states, quote, "And the companion of the Savior is Mary Magdalene. Christ loved her more than all the disciples and often kissed her on the mouth," unquote. This line, stripped of its literalism, signifies a symbolic and spiritual intimacy rooted in shared gnosis, Jesus' marital status was not scandalous within his Jewish milieu. Rabbinic norms of the time presumed marriage, particularly for a man called rabbi. A celibate male in his 30s would have been anomalous, if not suspect, within the Second Temple Judaism. From a linguistic anthropological perspective, this erasure mirrors a typical pattern in colonized or religiously coerced societies, where dominant powers dictate lexical access to sacred identity, just as dysphasic patients struggle to retrieve once familiar words. So too has our collective cultural memory lost access to the lexicon of holy marriage and divine femininity. Many traditions speak quietly but persistently of Mary Magdalene's flight with her children after Jesus' crucifixion. The tradition preserved in southern France claims she, with other holy refugees, arrived by boat at Saint Mary's de la Mer. There she preached, taught, and was eventually buried. The Church of Saint Maximin la Saint Baume claims her relics. These are not vague myths, but persistent regional oral histories bolstered by archaeological anomalies and medieval pilgrimage routes. Simultaneously, a different but compelling tradition exists in Kashmir, India. The Rosabal Temple in Srinagar, a site that some believe to be the final resting place of Jesus, bears an inscription and iconography some interpret as aligning with Jesus, known there as Yosef. Textual records such as the Bhagavad Purana, a Sanskrit text from the 1st through 4th centuries CE, refer to a foreign teacher who preached monotheism and moral purification, bearing an uncanny resemblance to the Nazarene. Local Islamic tradition, too, speaks of a prophet buried in Rosabal who came from the West. If we view these divergent traditions through the lens of a speech and language pathologist trained in the pragmatics of storytelling under duress, these regional myths resemble trauma narratives, divergent, partially occluded, yet resilient in their thematic consistency. Rather than undermining Christian theology, this relocation hypothesis grounds it in lived embodiment and universal archetypes: the wounded healer, the spiritual exile, and the divine family in diaspora. Mary Magdalene's apostleship challenges centuries of ecclesiastical aphasia around the feminine voice. In Rabboni, the term she uses to address the risen Christ, we hear a profoundly intimate tone, a patient relearning to name their beloved, a disciple regaining fluency in sacred dialogue, that she was the first witness to the resurrection is not a mere narrative device, but a theological and epistemic revolution. As modern hospice practitioners know, it is often the female caregivers, daughters, wives, and nurses who hold the final conversation with the dying. They act as witnesses, memory keepers, and midwives of transcendence. Mary Magdalene then becomes the prototype of such midwife. Her witness is both literal and metaphysical. If she were Jesus' wife, her apostleship would not merely reinforce her authority, but embody a radical relational theology. Here, power is not conferred by institutional ordination, but by mutual recognition and shared mission. Such a model subverts Roman patriarchy and modern ecclesiastical bureaucracy alike. In repeatedly resisting Rome, whether in speech, relocation, or her very existence, Mary models spiritual defiance. She represents the voice of the suppressed interlocutor, who continues speaking truth in broken systems. In 2025, amidst post-pandemic recalibrations, ecological upheavals, and transhumanist debates, the collective consciousness is increasingly hungry for integrative, embodied, and relational spirituality. The reemergence of the Jesus-Mary lineage narrative offers more than historical correction. It serves as a neurocognitive realignment for a species. A species experiencing widespread spiritual aphasia. To disclose that Jesus was married and had children is to reclaim divine embodiment from abstract transcendence. It invites people, especially those traumatized by patriarchal religious systems, back into a relational theology where marriage, intimacy, and parenting are not profane but sacred mirrors of divine unity. Learning that Mary Magdalene was an apostle to the apostles restores feminine agency and theological eloquence to the spiritual lexicon. Her story models spiritual fluency in the face of epistemic violence. Exactly what our young generations, especially women and marginalized groups, seek in reconfiguring identity and purpose. Discovering that Jesus may have walked and taught in India, alongside yogic masters, Sufi poets, and dharmic philosophers, punctures the illusion of doctrinal supremacy. It fosters cross cultural humility and a composition sense of spiritual brotherhood. In linguistic rehabilitation, we aim to restore coherence without forcing conformity. Likewise, restoring this narrative is not about dogmatic imposition, but opening neural and cultural pathways to more profound coherence. It is about creating semantic space for multiple truths that are psychologically and spiritually integrative. Rediscovering and accepting Jesus' marriage, offspring, global ministry, and Mary's apostleship will not destroy faith, but restore its therapeutic potential. It will decentralize theological power, open the semantic field to feminine expression, and re-encode divinity as relational, compassionate, and cross-cultural. In clinical practice, when a patient regains the ability to narrate their story coherently after brain injury, something sacred happens. They weep. Their families weep. Healing occurs not simply through neurons, but through meaning. So too our species now weeps for its lost sacred narratives. The 2025 consciousness, increasingly informed by neuroplasticity, systems thinking, and emotional intelligence, is ready, perhaps desperately so, to welcome back Mary Magdalene and the true embodied Yeshua. In doing so, we heal the spiritual aphasia of centuries past and awaken the neurosemantic architecture of a more compassionate and integrated future. Let the apostles to the apostles speak again. Let this sacred family be remembered, and let our collective consciousness finally, reverently say, "Welcome home." You and all your loved ones are always in my prayers. Samuel Joseph Bell, civilian journalist, spiritualmag.org.